Okay, so we're going to go a little bit further with our economic systems and the three realms that were introduced to us in the first chapter. So in this chapter, we're going to be looking at the three realms of the economic systems that we learned about in chapter 1. And we need to figure out what makes a realm successful, what would cause it to fail, how do we assess it, just those sorts of factors. And so with that in mind, he starts his chapter with these two quotes. He has John Maynard Keynes identifying that the political problem of mankind is to combine three things: economic efficiency, social justice, and individual liberty. So that seems like a very straightforward statement. Let's move on, everything's fine, until we take a moment to actually think about each one of those three things, and we start to see that they actually contradict each other quite a bit. Economic efficiency is about finding the lowest cost method of producing the output you're going to produce. But that's really it. It's nothing about the output and who's going to get it and what is the fair distribution. Social justice would be much more concerned about who is getting the output. Is it fair? And so you could imagine, yeah, okay, we can do economic efficiency. We can find this low cost method of production, and then we'll figure out the fair way of redistributing it. And then you run right into individual liberty, which is, if you're doing confiscation or redistribution of the output, then you are violating my personal property. And so that's a violation of my liberty. Um, so all of these are important, but they do start to kind of clash with each other. So yes, this is definitely a political problem for mankind to solve. And then the second quote is calling back some of the ideas of what we talked about in chapter 1, that values and culture, while not being popular with economists who like the quantifiable factors, they are still important to talk about. And we saw that in the last chapter because it makes a difference on how these sorts of things shape the institutions. The institutions create the incentives to organize your factors of production and therefore actually produce the output. As we proceed through the book and we're looking at different types of economic systems, whether that's market-centered, state-centered, community-centered, and within each one of those types, there are different kinds of economic systems. How do we compare them, contrast them, say what's good, what's bad? And so he's going to produce 8 criteria that allow us to examine any type of economic system a little more deeply. Now, out of these 8, he's not saying, number 1's most important, number 8's the least important. He's not got them ranked in any particular way. One of the things we have to understand is that different societies would have different values. Well, of course we know that, but those different values mean that they might feel differently about some of these criteria than another society. Another issue is this list he comes up with, while each seems like a important factor if you were thinking about your economic system, they don't all necessarily work well together. There can be some inconsistencies. So with all of that said, what are our 8 criteria? Boom, here they are. So here's our 8, and what you're going to see, just to give you a little heads up, is in chapters 3, 4, and 5, when he looks at each type of economic system a little more deeply, he's going to come back to this list and he's going to talk about how, for example, in chapter 3, a market-centered economic system promotes prosperity, and then he'll have a chapter or a part of the chapter where he talks about how it may not promote prosperity, how it can lead to freedom, how it can lead to lack of freedom. And that's how he's going to go through each of the next 3 chapters. Little hint, all of this is good. It can help you find pros and cons of the different systems. Just don't get too bogged down in these sections of the next 3 chapters. It can get a little bit wordy. So just look for the highlights as you read through this 8 criteria assessment method in chapters 3, 4, and 5. But first, for now, let's just talk a little bit about what each of these 8 are, just to make sure we are on the same page about that. So prosperity is his first one, and I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. You're most likely going to evaluate prosperity for an economic system by some measure of income and wealth, and the most common would be a increasing GDP per capita. Freedom was his second one. And again, I think it's pretty clear what we think freedom would mean, but I think that first bullet point really captures it. It's just this desire to be self-directing, to be directing your own life. It can have a positive correlation with income because with more money can come more choices. And then it can include issues around a democratic political system. It doesn't have to, but certainly if you were in a democratic political system where your rights were protected, that can be a situation where the state is actually helping ensure your freedom. Okay, moving on to the next three, we got justice. And this could be a more broad concept where we are talking about legal justice or maybe economic justice or maybe social justice. But in some way, does this particular economic system that you would be evaluating, does it help an individual receive that to which they have a right or deserve? And so you can also be looking at how a system may not be providing justice. So if there is some sort of widespread perception of injustice, that itself can be very crippling to an economic system. It makes the people feel that the institutions are not legitimate and can often lead to a collapse of a system. Stability would be certainly something important to each of the realms because the economic system cannot maintain itself if there is some sort of violent threat or overthrow of the society. And then peace would be how well does the system promote peace? Is it using the resources for creation as opposed to destruction? Or is the system perhaps not promoting peace? That's the sort of thing you'll see when he comes back to that particular criteria. And wrapping up his last three of the 8, he first mentions here sustainability. Are your resources being used in a way that not only helps you grow today, but will allow growth in the future? How well does the system take in account issues about future growth? And so that could be something where the system does in fact promote sustainability, or maybe it is a system that's not taking into account these issues and is actually an unsustainable growth. Human development, you can think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The idea being that we would want a system that is allowing people to move up higher along such a hierarchy and can get an improving quality of life. And then democracy would be whether or not the citizens have some sort of voice in the laws that govern them.